everybody. Thanks very much for joining us to our Resources Committee. If I drop off the call this morning, Angela Leach has kindly agreed to take over the chair until I can rejoin. Hopefully that won't happen. Very warm welcome to colleagues from Police Scotland, from the SPA, from Scottish Government and from HMICS. As usual, just a quick reminder that members have all read the papers, so if attendees could keep their introductory remarks to a minimum, focusing on anything that's not included in the reports or key changes since the reports were submitted. That means that we can focus the limited time that we've got in terms of questions and any issues that members have. No apologies have been received this morning. As I say, we're still waiting on Tom, but I'm sure he will join us very shortly. Moving on to item 1.3, are there any other declarations of interest and connections that members wish to raise? No? Okay, thank you. In accordance, in terms of section 1.4, decisions in taking business in private, I would like to invite members to agree to take an agenda items 7 through to 10 this morning in private. Thank you. And there have been no formal decisions taken since we last met as a committee last month. So we'll move on to section 2 now, minute and actions from the previous meeting. The minutes of the meeting of the 17th of February have been circulated. Are members content to approve those minutes? Yeah, thanks very much. And then moving on to the action log. There are 3 actions on the log. 1 action isn't yet due. 2 that we have papers for today. So I'm going to propose that we close those actions, and any further actions that arise today, we can add them as new actions to the log. Are members content with that approach? Yeah, okay, thanks very much. That takes us into item 3.1 then. Period 10, Financial Monitoring Report. I'm going to hand over to Lynn. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Period 10 is included at Appendix A of the report, and that contains all the relevant detail and the movements, variances, etc., in revenue, capital and reform. So just in terms of where we're at the minute, we're obviously at that critical point of trying to manage the year-end position, which members will be aware is a huge effort across the organisation, given, you know, sort of lack of year-end flexibility. So in terms of where we're at, we obviously reported previously in the Q3 forecast largely an overall break-even position, which was an overspend in revenue offset by an underspend in reform, together largely taking us to that break-even position. We have seen the period 11 results, and we are seeing some slippage in some of our forecasts, particularly in those sort of variable type spend and areas where we've been actively slowing down to manage within the 26-27 budget. So those are largely within the legal space, which members know is very variable throughout the year, depending on settlement dates, etc., and workforce modernisation, where posts have been paused, slowed, etc., for moving into next year. So we are seeing that coming through in the year-to-date numbers as we move towards the start of the new financial year. Collectively, we are looking at it. We're looking at how we can mitigate any movements there in terms of can we bring anything forward from next year to offset, etc. But just given where we are in the financial year, the levers are quite limited, but we are actively pursuing it. But that's just for awareness that we are seeing that sort of movement in those variable type spends. So obviously there will be an interim outturn report will come to the next committee, which will give the full update, and we'll obviously keep the SPA cited on any of the movements as we move throughout the remainder of the next couple of weeks of the financial year. In terms of capital, year-to-date spend continues to progress, at a better rate than last year. As at today, we've probably got about £8 million left to spend, 7 million of which is confirmed. So we are again in that fine balance of working with the business areas around the slippage we need, the commitments that have been made, and really trying to flex those delivery dates. And again, the effort to manage that should not be underestimated. It's involving every area of the organisation to manage that. So that work is actively ongoing, and like I say, full updates will be provided over the next couple of weeks. And with regards to reform, already touched on that. And again, we've had previous discussions around where the reform position is in terms of we're seeing an underspend in reform, but it's helping to support some of those unfunded pressures, particularly around pay award in the current financial year. So that's probably the key messages that I was wanting to just update on top of the P10 report, but happy to open up to any questions. Thank you.
Lynn, thanks very much, and thanks to everybody involved in trying to get us exactly where we need to be on the 31st of March. Never easy, but we greatly appreciate all the effort that goes into achieving our financial targets and working forward into 26-27 as well. Thank you. I'll open up to members. Alistair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And as always, can express my appreciation for the hard work that is done in managing what is a very large budget, but a very complex budget. And, you know, I appreciate everything that's happening in relation to year end. And I think that close working relationship between finance and also all the budget holders and, you know, the teams responsible for ultimately delivering policing services to Scotland, you know, that's noted and that's appreciated. My question actually was around the slippage and the underspend in terms of the reform budget. I wonder if you could maybe give us a little bit of an insight into any potential operational implications of that, or any implications that will begin to roll into 26, 27, you know, given the significance of the transformation programme that's being undertaken, and also, you know, that working, that 3-year plan working towards Vision 2030.
So I can certainly come in from the budgetary perspective, and others may want to come in around the operational impact. So members will be aware at the start of the year, the budget that was approved did include an over allocation, if you like, in terms of over allocation slippage management. We use the two interchangeably. So that was set with quite a significant level, really to help with the inflexibility around like multi-year, etc. Because we know if we set a budget, you know, balanced in their slippage, we have limited levers to then bring that forward. So there will always be an element of over allocation within like reform and capital to help manage those year-end positions, and we're seeing that actively play out at the minute. But in terms of the over allocation that was included, you know, back at the start of the financial year, it was quite a significant number in terms of the size of the reform budget, but that was while work was ongoing around the deliverability and the sort of, you know, the transformation plan and programme. So that is actively getting looked at, both, as you said, as part of in year where we're at, moving into next financial year, and we'll have more on that in the budget discussion later. But again, just as important, what does it mean for multi-year in line with reform strategies, etc. And you know, we've got work ongoing around that multi-year, whether it's reform, capital, revenue, and we'd be looking to bring something back around that in the summer. But that's certainly from this sort of financial perspective. I see the Dep's got her hand up if she wants to come in around the operational side of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for the question, Alistair. So I think just in terms of operational impact, we haven't seen operational impact as a consequence of the reprioritisation of the portfolio. I think probably fair to say when we go out to the business initially in terms of what are the things we want to do, we get a wish list of items, and then we spend the time reprioritising in terms of budget, and that's the consequence that you see playing out in terms of the end result. This year, we've done it slightly differently in that we have, last year we used the phrase over program, but I don't particularly like that, because actually what it is looking at what we need to do across the organisation, and then throughout the year we manage that in terms of slippage and overspend, etc., or underspend in this case. We've done it slightly differently this year in terms of, I think the number was around 16 million last year. This year, you'll see in the current budget, we're around 4.7, which I'm really comfortable with, and we'll manage that in year. We know, unfortunately, sometimes programmes have slippage. Some of that is out of our control in terms of bigger, larger policing programs that tend to be delayed, and that's okay. I think I'm really confident with the work that we're doing across the portfolio that we'll have a really good understanding of what the transformation portfolio looks like in 26-27. We haven't quite finished that yet, but we've done an awful lot of work over the last few weeks to get us in good shape for 26-27. So hopefully we'll be able to report as we go through resources, just in terms of keeping you posted on the progress around that. But no huge operational impact. We've delivered what we wanted to, and hopefully you'll see that as we move through today. Thank you.
That's great. Can I have a follow-up question, Chair, if that's okay? Appreciate the approach that's been taken and the complexities that lie behind it all. Just wanted to make a comment that in terms of reform, ultimately what we want to see is a delivery vision 2030. But in terms of performance within policing, it's how we should work through these, and you improve effectiveness, you improve efficiency. Within the performance world, we start to see progress in key areas there. So it's just joining it all together. And then a kind of last question for me is we understand absolutely the challenges of not having multi-year budgets, not being able to borrow, and also being unable to hold reserves. And strong cases have been made perhaps to change some of that within policing. So my question really is, given that is the actual situation at the moment, and credit to everybody for how they've managed the budget, and it looks, fingers crossed that we're going to come in with a balanced budget. What are your thoughts in terms of this year's budget? What lessons have you learned, in terms of how you mitigate around these areas and you manage within, the actual regulations, if that's the right word, that currently stand?
CC Smith?
I was just going to come in on the sort of efficiency piece, Alistair, in terms of how we link that to performance. I think it's a really good point. And this year we've probably taken a slightly different look at our programmes and work that we plan to do with the sort of limited budget that we have in reform, which when you compare it to the 1.6 billion, sort of the 18.8 million is actually fairly small. I know it's not a small amount of money, but when you look at it like that. So we've taken real care this year to look at what are the things that will give us the greatest impact on the front line in terms of efficiency, demand reduction, whether that's digital, whether that's automation, whether that's use of particular pieces of kit, etc. So we've tried really hard to kind of focus on that for the next 12 months. Some of the sort of things that we would have liked to have done perhaps might take us a bit longer just in terms of time because of the monetary situation, but we've taken probably a slightly different approach this year in terms of looking at things from a more of an efficiency lens, and you'll see within that is things like public digital contact. So how are we managing the things that come into the organisation? How are we getting better at managing what demand is for policing, but what is also for other agencies? How are we making that more effective and efficient for members of the public to contact us, sort of the self-serve type work, so that we can take some of the demand out as opposed to it getting pushed into the front line. So hopefully you'll see that reflected in the programme, and we'll make sure we try and link that in terms of the performance agenda as well, so moving forward. But I'll leave finance colleagues to pick up the lessons learned just in terms of budgeting, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah?
Thank you, and thank you, Alistair, for the question. So your point is absolutely valid, and post-election, my plan is to actively engage and pick up those conversations around more sort of treasury, multi-year financial borrowing, etc. All the things that we've discussed previously. So that still is very much on the agenda, and to push into SG on that. In terms of other learnings and things that we're already planning for next year. So with regards our capital and our reform in particular, we I think with Breda and Donna, we have that sort of strategic view now where we are starting to build multi-year plans, but we're also building priority matrices and having that planning such that we've got the phrase shovel-ready projects either in reform or estates to be able to go, okay, we've got slippage. What's next underneath the red line that we drew at the budget time that we can move up, move down, and we're much more agile then throughout the year. So that I can see coming really into fruition in that it's already started, but will really, really play into next year. The other areas that I want to reassure you is also in relation to that priority, having a deeper dive. So we will continue the capital investment group throughout the year, which looks at the ups, the downs, but also do a real deep dive at half year. And when I say half year, sort of September, October time, where we will go, okay, where are we thinking we're landing? And actually encouraging our commanders, our budget holders, our leaders across the business that honesty is good. You may have set a budget, but at that half year point, we'd like to know actually this isn't going to happen, or we don't have the bandwidth, etc., such that we can take that view in plenty of time. And then finally, I'd also like to pick up on starting to think more holistically about rolling replacements. We have a really, really effective rolling replacement within fleet, and we've seen that work really, really well. So how can we roll that model out more effectively across the business in terms of particularly our capital spend? And it's also that early strategic engagement where there is bandwidth within each of our areas of the organisation to engage with procurement. So how can we set up those frameworks early to make it more agile, less onerous in terms of timing when we need to move more quickly? So they're the kind of areas about big strategic picture. We'll continue those conversations with SG, but we're doing our own work internally as well to help us as best we can.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Chair. Appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Alistair, for those 8 questions, and to attendees for the response. Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, again, thanks to Lynn and the team for all the work that you've done throughout the year. It's a really good report. Can I just pick up on capital and the fleet aspect that you just mentioned, Sarah? I notice in one of the slides that there's a 1.2 over forecast due to earlier than expected delivery of vehicles. Now, I know that last year we did approve additional expenditure on fleet for a variety of reasons. Can I just check that is within the approved budget? And I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand a wee bit on the capital forecast and what's been delivered so far. Is that in line with the original programme, or have there been in-year adjustments made by the capital investment group?
Lynn?
Yeah, no, so I'm happy to come in on some of that. So in terms of the report itself, page 11 sort of details that kind of overall capital position. So what you'll see there in the table is the budget, the full year budget, and the revised forecast, if you like. So that's the sort of right hand side of the table. So for fleet in particular, you can see it's 800k over. So that's essentially 800k additional has been approved in year. So in terms of what fleet would be working to for the financial year is the 12.6 million as per the Q3 forecast, and that's all went through the capital investment group, and the reallocations are sort of detailed there. So it was like approved additional ARV vehicles, for example. In terms of the year to date, in terms of the 1.2 million that you're referring to there, so that is against the Q3 forecast, the full year Q3 forecast. So fleet are looking to deliver £12.6 million, and at the end of P10 they had delivered 10.7. So it's still within that revised Q3 forecast. It's just ahead of where they thought they would be in January. So they've taken deliveries in January instead of February, but not a risk to the overall forecast. And then I guess any sort of additional movements will come through sort of the year-end position as we're managing the year-end levers. But essentially, fleet are in line with their Q3 forecast that's been sort of approved through the capital investment group.
Thanks, Lynn. That's great.
Thanks very much. Any other questions or comments from members on period 10? Just one from myself then, in terms of the kind of 2 high-risk areas to revenue, over time, any significant consequences as a result of the Glasgow Central fire or the Old Firm disruption, and the ill health pensions, £3.4 million budget overcast there. Are we content with those forecasts and that those are manageable? DCC Spears.
Thanks, Chair. I can offer a comment in relation to overtime, and it's probably a really good question in the context of it's one of those challenges that we're faced that we don't expect. So obviously that was a significant fire. Our locus around that is about locust protection. But when you look at the scale of that fire, it's really significant. So at its height, we had probably 36 officers per shift providing locust protection. So in effect, over the 3 shifts, that could be in excess of 100 officers. So that does have a bearing on moving resources across the country, because we're drawing them away for other areas, and it does have overtime implications. I think the benefit of having the overtime management group meeting every month allows us to monitor the arrangements around that. I would suggest the football slightly differently, because we had the resources on duty to police events like that, but you know, it will become a point of consideration going forward about the proportionality of resource levels. All of that we will pick up on a monthly basis through our sort of overtime management arrangements. But I think it just demonstrates, if you like, the precarious or uncertain nature at times that we do face in policing, and these are 2 examples in the last couple of weeks, and we've had lots of them over the course of the year. So I'm confident that, you know, senior leaders have got a really, really strong grip on their overtime allocations, and we discuss and manage that through that group.
Thanks very much. And Lynn, in the ill health pensions?
Yeah, so we are seeing some movement in the ill health pensions. So obviously we've seen that as a pressure throughout the financial year, which from a financial perspective is a pressure, but from a well-being or organisational operational point of view, it's a good thing that the backlog's getting addressed. So we've been looking at how we can accommodate that from the overall budget. So I suppose just going back to what I touched on earlier about, we're seeing some underspends in that variable cost, that like around legal, for example. So we are actively looking at areas like this that we know where there'll still be a pipeline for next year as to whether any could be brought forward, almost to switch ill health payments with legal, if you like. So probably we might see an increase in that above forecast, but it will be controlled, deliberate decisions, etc., to mitigate the risk of underspend around that. And it will be, obviously, as I say, switching between financial years as opposed to additional, if you like, it would be bringing things forward if we can.
That's very helpful and assuring. Thanks very much, everyone, for answering all those questions and giving us that assurance around deliverability of the financial position for 25-26. We'll move on now then to section 4, 3 key papers here. We'll start with 4.1, which is the Q3 update on transformation activity and benefits. And Breda, are you going to lead off?
Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, Chair. So as many of you know, the revised quarterly report that we've submitted is part of the broader work that we've been doing, leading a transformation within Police Scotland within our team. We thought it would be helpful to share a few updates with you that are related specifically to this section, the work that we've been doing to move this forward. Firstly, in the report, you'll notice that a number of the projects have a RAG status of red or amber. And I thought it would be helpful to draw out maybe some of the key themes around that and relate it to how have we been operating over the last year that will hopefully move us forward in that area. So predominantly, when you look at the projects that are red or amber, there are 2 key themes that emerge. One of them is around resources. So I'll come to the second one a little bit later. If we look first at resources, we have currently 2 challenges. The first is a lack of change management expertise, which I've talked about before. The second is that we have difficulty, as I know you're aware, in securing other specialist roles. We've relied heavily in the past on temporary contracts to support our projects, and the reality is there's often a delay in recruiting these specialist resources. Often after a lengthy onboarding process and, of course, significant time and investment, we find that the people leave for a permanent role elsewhere, and we need to start the process again. The impact on projects is that they're amber and sometimes red, and the impact also is that the timelines move out and we have to do work in terms of raising a change request. So that's one of the issues that we are facing. So I know you're aware, most people on this call, that over the last 6 months, we have been restructuring the transformation function to address these two reasons, these two issues. One of the key drivers around the transformational change is to increase our change management capacity to support these programs of work so that we have enough resource to support the 39 projects that we've got at the moment. So the other driver is to move to a more permanent structure to give us a pool of Police Scotland trained professionals who we can allocate dynamically according to priorities. So that work is ongoing. The good news is our new structure has been finalised. It should be noted that since we started this consultation process, which was back in September, on advice from our HR colleagues, we have held vacancies. The reality is that vacancies have steadily grown, and we're now sitting with about 30 vacancies in transformation, and that's 30 vacancies if you look at total number of people of 138 people, so it's a big percentage. Alistair, one of the comments you were making earlier was around the reform funding and the slippage, and you'll notice in the information that Lynn has provided, 4 million of that slippage is about transformation resource underspend, which is a result of what I've been talking about. So we are actively recruiting to fill these gaps, and it will take time to do that, to get the right people into these roles. So it's probably worth helpfully mentioning that the likelihood is that there will be constraints on recruitment due to the revenue position for the next financial year. I am working through this. I am looking at prioritising critical roles, which we have already started recruitment for. And with my team, I'm reviewing what are alternative ways that we can deliver within the resource envelope that we've got. So it's just to share that with you, that there are recognised reasons why some projects are amber and red, and we are actively addressing and managing this to set us up really for success over the next year. So if I look specifically just with a few important points in terms of the paper that's in front of you, I've already mentioned that there are 39 projects in total. Of these, 29 are within these 9 core programmes. One of those at the moment has a red status, which is Data Drives Digital, and one of them has an amber status, which is policing for our communities. In the paper, for every project that is either red or amber or has changed colour in the last quarter, we have included a narrative which is on pages 6 to 8. My hope is that the narrative is giving you enough information to understand the rationale around why the project isn't green, and to give you a bit of a sense of the route forward to hopefully get it back on track. So just to kind of give you that as a sense. So in addition, we have 8 standalone projects, 4 of them are legislation and 4 are classified as other. One of these has a status as red and 2 are amber. And again, there's information on the rationale around any project that's red or amber or has changed colour in the report, and that's on pages 11 to 12. I mentioned earlier that there are 2 themes that are coming out of why projects are red or amber. One was around resources. The other one is around delays that are outside our control, which predominantly we find in these standalone projects, because they tend to be legislation or we're working with the Home Office, and often there are associated delays. And you'll see in the private session, one of the papers desk, we're talking a bit more detail around that. So that's just to give you a bit of a summary of the projects. On page 13 is an overview of the transformation financial spend. And to be sort of helpful and hopefully clear, the reason that we don't include information in that in terms of the slippage is because, of course, it's in the information that Lynn provides. And hopefully through that previous conversation, Alistair, hopefully there's enough sort of clarity in terms of the rationale, and also from DCC Smith that this has not impacted us from an operational policing perspective. So hopefully to give you that reassurance. So if I look at, and building on some of what DCC Smith said a few moments ago, if I look at the over allocation for this year, and for new members, so I joined Police Scotland 1 year ago, and when I first joined and I saw the over allocation of 16.2 million on a budget of 20.4, I was honestly surprised. I thought that's a big allocation, over allocation, and it became clear as DCC Smith said that that's because at that point we hadn't prioritised and all the different things that we have a very ambitious, exciting agenda. Everything that we have a real energy to take forward was in that current agenda, hence the over allocation. And it's to give you assurance that not only have we been working really closely at looking at that, and I look particularly at Lynn. We have been so supported by finance to manage that over allocation this year. And if I look forward to next financial year, CDIO, Hendry, Lynn Brown, Gemma, the team, we have been working so closely together to set ourselves up for success next year. So that by that I mean, and we'll cover it later with the prioritisation paper, we have looked at how can we be clearer on what our priorities are for next year. And as DCC Smith has said, that means that in the session that we'll talk about later, the over allocation for next year is about 4.7 million. So we're in a better, stronger position, not because the over allocation is lower, because we have more clarity and certainty on the priorities that we will be actively driving forward. So we're in a better position as we look to next financial year. I thought it would be also helpful to say that in the paper, one of the requests that we had from yourselves was around change requests, because at these committees we do regularly have change requests. So we have included new information, a new section in this paper. It's on pages 14 to 19, and it gives clarification on the change requests. So for all in-flight projects, we've included information on the business case, the cost, and the original baseline close date. And for all of these projects, we've included the number of change requests and the impact to the cost and to the baseline close date. So there's a lot of information in there, and we can go maybe at a separate forum if that's helpful for you. We can go into more detail around the specifics of that. So just to give you that sense. And the final section, which we've included now for probably maybe three quarters, is the transformation benefits. Again, in the next paper, we'll talk in a little bit more detail about that. For me, the key is to share that when I first joined, we looked at the numbers. We looked at the amount that we were saving and the hours that we were releasing in terms of efficiency. A huge amount of work has been done, and particularly if I look to my right, CI Booker, try and remember people's titles, has done a huge amount of work from OpEvolve in looking at the qualitative benefits information, particularly as they relate to operational policing, and that's now included in this pack. What we will be working on and we really want to focus our attention on in the next 6 months is implementing the benefits framework and ensuring that every quarter you're getting even more substantive information from a governance point of view to scrutinise on both the quantitative and the qualitative benefits information. So just to give you a flavour of, that's the direction. It's a journey. We're moving forward, and we've still got quite a way to go. So hopefully that's helpful, particularly for newer members, and really happy to open it up to sort of questions and comments.
Rita, thanks very much, and we do really appreciate all the effort that goes into developing this report and taking on board our feedback as well. So really good to see that for the detail that we asked around the kind of for the change requests, and helpful to hear your plans in terms of how you're going to capture both the quantitative and qualitative information in terms of benefits aligned hopefully to the benefits framework that we'll come on to talk about, and the prioritisation that we'll come on to talk about as well. And I think, as Alistair was mentioning early on, really important to start to kind of see how that plays through in terms of performance against those 2030 objectives. Thank you. Colleagues, any comments or questions? Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that very comprehensive overview and for the papers as well in advance. And full disclosure, brand new member to the board since January, so please indulge me a little if I'm asking some questions that help also to build my understanding. And I also noted really, you know, as I look at the transformation programme and the reform programme, your point earlier about this kind of been about 1.5% of your overall budget is well noted. So, but with that in mind, recognising that it is a small proportion of the overall budget, can I start with just a general question, given the current financial constraints and noting the reflection on progress so far, how much of a strategic priority is transformation within the organisation, and what level of executive focus and level of resourcing has been given to really drive it forward? And perhaps you could also help me with, if we were to get things back on track, what's actually the cost to get it back on track, and indeed is there appetite to think about that given the financial constraints?
CC Smith, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, I can start. So just in terms of the first part of your question, Nicola, around executive kind of oversight, we had a portfolio reshuffle in March last year to provide more focus on transformation and digital and data. So we recut the portfolios, and my role was to have more oversight on that, which I have done over the last 12 months. We brought in the Director of Transformation and restructured how we were operating in that. And I think I reflect on this quite a lot, actually, in terms of your original point around the allocation of the budget in terms of a percentage of the overall budget. I think we spend a lot of time and energy and effort looking at the reform budget in terms of how we do that. I would say we are absolutely, as an organisation, committed to transforming, to being innovative, to being data-driven, and having digital technology for our officers and staff. My sort of counter to that is, with our budget 86% pay, it sometimes proves tricky. And if we were able to, I'd love to invest more in this space, and I'd love to have more resource in this area. But we are slightly constrained in terms of money. We work really hard to make sure we leverage as much as we can, and we squeeze everything out of that budget. We work with partners across policing and other sectors to ensure that we're getting best value in terms of the work that we're doing. We learn a lot from policing across the UK in terms of what works, what doesn't, and we are involved in that. I would also say, I think my reflection would be, when Police Scotland started, the focus was rightly on operational grip and making sure we understood our business as one national organisation. I think we probably didn't perhaps invest in terms of the national infrastructure that we needed to at the beginning. And I think I often use the phrase riding the train as we're laying the tracks, if that makes sense. So it feels a little bit like we've got some amazing projects and programs over the line in the last few years. I look at things like Desk and the rollout of body-worn video. I look at COS, National Crime System. All of those things are incredible and have taken a lot of energy, investment, time, and a lot of people on this call have done an awful lot of work there. I also think in some ways we are really ahead in terms of things like our data science capability, but we are still in the position where we're balancing the two. So we're trying to kind of improve our infrastructure around things like call handling, body-worn video rollout, etc., at the same time as investing in innovation and technology to give our frontline officers and staff the ability to be more efficient and effective in terms of their roles. So it's a really delicate balance. I'm hoping that we will be in the position in the future where we will have done the majority of the infrastructure and we will be able to focus more on the kind of innovation work that we really want to do. So I suppose in answer to your question, strategically, this is exceptionally important and probably shown by the amount of time and energy we spend on a very small proportion of the budget. Everyone on this call has had a huge role in that. And I see Andrew probably wants to come in just in terms of some of the context around that. But I'm genuinely, I would say, hopefully you're reassured by the fact that we absolutely, it's such a priority for us. And the Chief would say she wants to be the most digitally enabled policing service in the world. Genuinely, there's a real ambition there to be able to do it. So I think kind of we use our money wisely. It's a small pot, but I look at what we've achieved with it, and I think it's quite impressive. But I'll bring colleagues in because I noticed there's some hands up. So hopefully that gives you a starter for 10.
Thanks, DC Smith. Andrew Richmond, would you mind holding whilst I bring Andrew Henry and Breda back in? Because I think they'll probably want to contribute to this point, and then I'll come back to Nicola for any further comments. Thank you. Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, just to comment on the points made by the debt, I think when you think back to roughly maybe 2019 when I joined, officers couldn't, from Dundee, couldn't log in Glasgow. We were still very separate in terms of the organisation, and I think when you look at kind of where we are now, it's massively different, and it's not just technology; it's also process and ways of working, etc. We're certainly entering a phase now, I think, where we're really going to be focused now on continuous improvement of the investments we've made. We've got national capabilities and platforms in place now. We are one organisation in the most part technology-wise. And I think the focus now is certainly shifting more into that space of actually making use of what we've got, as well as still bringing new capabilities in. But again, some of the big obvious ticket items in there, have been delivered. We've moved from paper notebooks to digital notebooks. We've moved from separate systems to single systems. So I think really the focus now is definitely shifting more into actually more innovation and kind of continuous improvement because we have the foundations in place. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And Breda?
So building on what DCC Smith and Andrew said, I thought I'd maybe share a perspective just from the last year. So DCC Smith started with part of what we've done in creating this function, if you like, within transformation, and DCC, we have now DCC for transformation, was in response to Nicola, just how significant the organisation is taking this. So I smile as I think about your question, Nicola, in terms of, is this a priority? What has struck me in the last year, and the reason I'm so excited to be part of Police Scotland and to be doing this role, is, Nicola, it's the passion and energy from everybody in the exec to drive this forward. I have worked in and with an awful lot of organisations, and honestly, I've never seen that before to this level. So very different response, but just more of a, this is very unusual to have an exec that are so passionate and actively supporting and driving these programmes of work. It's also linked into our Vision 2030 and our 3-year plan. So when you look at the detail in that is transformational change. So the Chief has set out her ambition, which is to drive this forward. The fact that we have a relatively small budget for a relatively ambitious agenda in some ways isn't a bad thing, because it forces us to prioritise and to think about what's most important. The reason for me that's quite significant and helpful is because from a people impact perspective, we can only do so much. So if we had unlimited budgets, we would have a different issue, which is we're trying to drive too much change that cannot land and be properly implemented from a people perspective. So I would say, honestly, we've got a pretty good balance.
Great.
And the excitement for me, honestly, is working with, if I look at, Tim Mayers is on the phone, Andrew's on the phone, DC Smith, I'm genuinely excited about the year ahead. We've got an awful lot to do. We've got the foundations in place to set us up for success.
Thank you. Chair, if I may have a thank you. Thank you very much, and I do get that absolute sense of the energy and the ambition. So thank you very much for that. Just coming back to the reality of the position, then noting 39 projects, 29 of which are core, 1.5% of budget, 30 people. 30 vacancies needed to be able to deliver, just the reality of the scenario now. And I note that there's a prioritization exercise going on. But how confident are we that or indeed, how do you think about reducing perhaps some of that to really focus on the priorities for delivery? Noting the points that you've made about capability in particular to deliver. And sorry, the other part of my first question was, do we actually know how much it would cost to get us back on track?
DC Smith, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, so in answer to your first question, Nicola, I don't think it's a case of getting us back on track, is my sense. I think we prioritise continually in terms of, so we're making sure that we sit within our envelope, our financial envelope, and some years we're able to allocate more money into transformation, other years less. And that brings us back to the annual budget cycle and reserves and all of those things that we know. And I do worry that as I look at our allocation financially and what's coming over the track, I'm concerned that actually in some cases we know we need more revenue investment, because with things like cloud and software as a service, we know that that's the way we want to go, but our budget doesn't reflect that. And we're having those conversations in terms of how do we get to a position where we're able to draw more in revenue to be able to support that method of spending than capital. Previously in the past, we would buy a piece of kit and that would be a capital spend. It's really different now, as you know, more than anyone, kind of in terms. So that's a complication. The resource position, we've always held a lot of vacancies in transformation. We've never had a fully established function. And I think that's okay. I think it gives us the flex to be able to use fixed term contracts, some day rate support as and when we need to with some of the more complex technical programs. I'm okay with that. I think where we would perhaps come unstuck is if we did have a fully permanent team in transformation that was 100% resourced, it wouldn't give us the flex and the ability to be able to draw on some of those resources as and when we needed them. So I'm quite comfortable with that. However, the sort of challenge I gave Breda was when she started, could we look at a degree of permanence? So we've got a sort of smaller team that we know is there that can work on the programs of work we've got moving forward. So, and that's what Breda's done with her structure. And I'm sort of comfortable with the level of resource that we have in that at the moment. I know throughout the year we will dial that up depending on what we're doing and the programs of work within it. So I guess probably not a massive yes or no in terms of your answer, but I guess it's really complicated because of the annual budgeting issue that we have. And I'm also worried that, we have ambitions to do some big pieces of work, which will take multiple years. They're not quick. You can't deliver them in a year. And we've got to really think about how we plan that financially and how we have those conversations with government, because we know the things we want to do in the pipeline in the future will take longer than 12 months. And how do we do that? How do we plan? Same with estates. Donna has the same issue in terms of, longer term investment. So a bit of a long answer to your question, but I guess just probably be reassured that we're managing the resource position and the impact and the consequences around delivery in terms of the transformation portfolio. And it's a bit of a delicate balance, hence why we have under and over spend and program.
ACC Mears, did you want to come in on that point too?
Yeah, maybe just to give I suppose, an SRO perspective on this. I think there's some bits to call out on this. I know reports like this can look really, really challenging, but to sort of reflect on the journey I've been on, certainly since I came here 5 or 6 years ago, this is the most lined up we've been. I would spend a significant proportion of my week on the transformation side, providing that leadership role. But what I think you see in front of you is a really honest assessment of where we are, but it's also a forecast assessment. So as I look at where my program is right now, it's doing really, really well, but we can see the blockages coming down the line. 3 or 4 years ago, we were hitting that and going past it. And then I was having to bring a change request in, looking to extend by 6 or 8 months because we were running at 56%. We've never had more than 56% of the resource we needed on our program. So the moment we started to turn red was when we were having to write a change request. So the forecasting is really solid, I think, on this. The second thing is the level of commitment. So that collaborative close working means that we are constantly getting more out of the resource that we have, as well as projecting where we need more resource. So as a transformation function, we are constantly evolving. We're becoming more effective and more efficient, and we're getting more out of what we have. And I think that means we've moved from a model where previously we were very siloed. Every program wanted their standing army of resource. And that meant that during slack times or busy times, they were either massively over-resourced or massively under-resourced. And I think through Breda and Deb Smith, we're much better at allocating resource across programs and therefore getting more out of it, which is encouraging. And the last bit I would say is we are still, I know it sounds crazy so many years in, but we are still building Police Scotland. So some of these bigger transformational bits, and we talked a lot about the delivery of that single digital platform that Andrew's led on. We're now building that single business platform that sits across that. That's essentially what policing for our communities is. That then gives us the grip and the understanding of our resource, where it sits. And that then allows us, as Deb Smith says, to, in a really informed way, start to have those kind of handoff conversations about, would I rather have 16,500 police officers and less kind of digital capability, or actually would we want to invest more in some of the revenue options and perhaps drop our headcount a little so that they're better informed and better supported? Those are conversations that 3 years ago we absolutely couldn't have, but in the next number of months, I think we're in a far better position to start to understand that as we move into a more settled business model. So there's a lot to be hopeful about, I think, and I suppose what I would say is, from my journey, I'm really encouraged by the Reds, because that shows that we're thinking ahead and pushing forward, and we're working really hard to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Breda, did you want to just come in there and then I'll go back to Nicola?
Thank you. To add to Tim's comment, this is a small and very significant aspect of our restructure. In the new restructure, we have a role which will be around resource deployment within our team. We've never had that before. So Tim alluded to the fact that we have been working more flexibly over maybe the last 4 or 6 months, and that's been quite hard work because we've been doing it in collaboration. This role will enable us to, as programs of work and projects change, to be far more flexible with the resource we've got. So Nicola, even though it might look like, well, yes, we do have gaps, and as DCC Smith said, I won't be proposing to fill all of them. We need to be quite flexible. For me, the key is that we have somebody whose role is around looking at our landscape, both in terms of people and in terms of projects, and making sure that we are moving people as required. And the other thing I wanted to build on from Tim was around what is different is how collaborative we're working. In terms of my team within transformation, in terms of the operational policing and the wider community, and that honestly is making a really big, profound difference.
Thank you.
Nicola, back to you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the candidness and the responses, and actually It's really encouraging to hear a number of those points, and indeed earlier in the earlier paper discussion, when Sarah was talking about agile ways of working in procurement and those types of things, it all feels as if there's some really useful methodology being considered right across the piece. So thank you. And I know we're doing a deeper dive on this particular area in the next couple of weeks, which will also be really useful. And the final thing that I will offer is a piece recognizing my day job, if you like, is within another public sector organisation that also manages budget year on year, is that it feels that there may be appetite to have those conversations about multi-year funding, and certainly I'm hearing that as well in other public sector organisations. So to be encouraged, Sarah, for sure, and also that public sector reform agenda that's coming forward, and our opportunity perhaps to think about how we would leverage that on a go-forward basis. So thank you, Chair, for the time to cover those points.
Thanks, Nicola. Andrew, thanks for waiting patiently.
Thank you, Pauline. DCC Smith's actually touched on a question I have later on for the budget in terms of how we procure between capital and revenue, and in terms of one, how those budgets are built from government, but two, how increasingly a number of products are very difficult to buy or to procure on a capital basis. They tend to be only offered on a revenue basis going forward. So that will be interesting to talk about in the budget session. As a new committee member like Nicola, I'd like to thank Breda for the introduction. It really set the scene really well. It's clear through the discussion here that the narrative of where we are is much more positive than a cold read of the papers would suggest. Clearly, we're changing how we scope projects. We're looking at different approaches to benefits realisation, which is really encouraging. And everyone said how it's a small budget vis-a-vis the total budget for the organisation, but it's actually still quite a lot of money, and it's a large number of projects which are running. So I think we need to remember that this is hugely important from that perspective as well. I've got two questions. The first is, whenever you get a huge amount of slippage in transformation, it raises the question of whether you're doing the right thing, because obviously the world of transformation changes quickly because it's heavily reliant on technology. So the question is, in the cold light of day, are we running projects now that we would either wish to materially change or indeed completely rescope and do in a different way? The second question is the notion of how we receive our monies and how slippage works in terms of those monies possibly being reallocated elsewhere. Through an external lens, it makes transformation look far more inefficient in the organisation than it clearly is. And I just wonder what we can do to try and protect a bigger element of that budget going forward, so that it doesn't just look like we're incapable of delivering projects when the reality is that money we thought would be allocated for them actually, for one reason or other, hasn't been available in that yet. Thank you.
I can start to come in and allow others to build on it. So two questions. So firstly, lovely to meet you, Andrew, and sort of welcome. The two questions around sort of slippage and then sort of money and how it's almost like as there's the two are sort of linked. As slippage occurs, how can we ensure that the money is best used on other things within transformation? It sort of brings me back to what I said earlier, Andrew, in terms of when I first started and sort of looked at this 16.2 million over allocation, and was quite sort of surprised, really, if you like, in terms of the value of that. And it alludes to the conversation I was saying earlier in terms of we've done a huge amount of work as we prepare for next year to get us into a better position, where rather than we've got this big list of priorities and desires, we're more focused on this is the key projects that are going to make the biggest difference, both to Vision 2030, to strengthening the front line, and also to driving efficiencies. So for me, if I think, Andrew, about this year, it's kind of a learning around how can we set ourselves up better for next year. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, and we were in our senior leadership board yesterday, around how can we be clearer earlier if there is slippage, so that we can look at what's the next priority that we can allocate the money to. So it is partly about having these robust conversations internally sooner, and it is also for me about setting ourselves up for success in the beginning. So it's to give you a bit of confidence that that is ongoing. The first point you mentioned in terms of it's still quite a big budget and there's a lot of projects, I completely agree with you. I am excited by the ambitions. I'm so excited by when you look at the projects, just what a powerful difference they're going to make. So your comment about how can we ensure that the money is really driving this transformation change, to assure you that is forefront of our mind and our thinking. And with finance, we will ensure that we are managing that so robustly in the year ahead. And I am more confident because I think we've got a really good foundation that we'll be starting with.
Thanks, Breda. Sarah, did you want to come in on that point? You're on mute, Sarah.
Apologies, I took my hand down rather than on mute. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy, for your question. It was more a sort of technical answer with regard to that budgeting angle, Andrew. So to be clear, we are given one budget for resource from government, and we internally allocate each year an amount to reform. We ring fence that to reform. So unfortunately, all the same rules apply in terms of that annual budgeting, unable to roll over, etc., not able to hold in reserves. In terms of managing that budget, I think with Breda and the team, it is as budget holder allocated to her to manage that in year and run between project to project, what's going up and what's coming in, what's coming out in terms of where we are in delivery, slippage, etc. But to reassure you, then there is a quarterly reforecasting process that we undertake. And I think in the coming year, what we want to do is have that quarterly reforecasting, but then be much better as an organisation in terms of that strategic view. So what are where we know where we're likely to land after Q1, Q2, Q3 across the organisation. What are our strategic priorities? What are our strategic risks? And where do we want to reallocate across the organisation? And that will include reform. So whilst we've ring-fenced it, it's also that active discussion of, do we want to continue transformation, or do we need it for other areas of the organisation for threat, harm, risk, service delivery as part of BAU? And so I think it's that holistic view and that active decision to reallocate if we were going to, and understanding the opportunities and the risks if we were to move funding from reform into the larger area of the business.
Thanks, Sarah. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. I'll come back and maybe ask about environment when we're talking through the budget later. Two final things, just coming back to some of the questions here. Firstly, if we're looking through the external lens, as I said, what can we do to try and make this transformation programme look more efficient externally? Because obviously we have a lot of projects running, we then have slippage. It looks like we're hugely inefficient, where the reality is I'm not detecting that to be the case, but that's the external vision which is projected because of this notion of money's possibly being removed to spend elsewhere, or allocations not finally arriving. And the point I said earlier also about Code Light of Day, are some of these programs we're running programs which actually will not deliver the benefits anywhere near what we thought they might do, and should we be looking at reprocuring that spend onto other projects instead?
Thanks. DCC Smith?
So if I pick up the first point, the second point first, we do that genuinely. There's an awful lot of work that goes into what's currently running. Do we need to pause something? Would we reprofile? Would we reallocate? We continually do that because the budget is so tight, and that's a really regular exercise. We genuinely do that a lot, and I'm confident that we get that right. The second point, I think we have a duty to be really candid around the progress in terms of projects and programmes, and I think that's what you will see in the pack. I don't see it as a negative, I suppose. I look at it that probably because I'm so in the detail around the sort of progress in terms of projects and programmes that I probably don't read it as that, but I take your point in terms of that. Maybe there's something we can do in terms of positivity. I sometimes think we forget about all of the work we've delivered, and we're really good at focusing on where perhaps we are a red status or what have you in a program, where we tend to draw that out, but actually what we perhaps don't focus on, and maybe we need to do a bit more of this, and it's a really good point, Andrew, is actually what we have done with very limited funding and resourcing over the last few years. And credit to Andrew and the team who have delivered an awful lot in terms of our digital transformation right across. I'm genuinely really proud of that, and I look at the way officers and staff are working now compared to even when I joined 4 years ago, and it's night and day. So perhaps that's a really good point, and maybe we need to get much better at that. I think we tend to spend quite a lot of time focusing on slippage or where we're behind or where we haven't managed to do something, whatever that might be. So good point, well made. Hopefully that kind of answers your question a bit, but just to reassure you, we absolutely do the reprioritisation. And in fact, we've had a lot of challenge panels lately, which have been really good. One ran till about 9 o'clock one night, where we did exactly that exercise. We got everyone in the room and we challenged each other in terms of, is this really a priority? And that's how we've ended up with the sort of prioritisation matrix work that Andrew and Breda are doing, and we are continually reviewing that. And I suppose my sense with that is we'll get to a point where we draw a red line, and that red line, nothing else can come in. If we see something else is an absolute priority, then what is stopping and what are we dropping out of the current work? That's really hard sometimes because most of that is in flight, as you will see. So you have to make some tough choices and look at what's the operational impact if we make that decision. But we do that really well, I think now. I'm really confident that sort of we're in a good space around that. Hopefully that helps, Andrew.
That's really good, thank you.
Breda, did you briefly want to come in on that point?
Thank you, thanks, Chair. As I reflect on your questions, Andrew, and particularly the first one around linking back to the sort of slippage and linking back to efficiency, and it all links to me in terms of benefits, which I know we will go on to look at in more detail shortly. So Andrew, it's to sort of give you a sort of sense that we've been on a journey in the last 12 months to get better at qualifying what difference are these programmes really making in terms of driving us towards Vision 2030, impacting on our 4 pillars, and also driving efficiency savings within the organisation. And it's a journey that we're on, Andrew. So as you look at the quarterly report, being honest, there's still a lot of gaps there that I would want us to close over the next couple of quarters to have more quantifiable information, Andrew, on the benefits that each of these programmes is giving, so that from a scrutiny point of view, from a public point of view, we're being clearer on this is the benefit we're getting from the investment. So we've got work to do on that. We'll talk a little bit more, no doubt, in the benefits part. The other thing, as you were talking, Andrew, we ran a session for the board, the SPA board, a number of months ago now that a few colleagues here attended. And that session, Andrew, was to bring to life the difference that these programmes are making to operational policing. So Andrew and Henry and the team set this session up, Evolve were heavily involved, and we had operational police officers that talked through, which Andrew alluded to a little bit earlier, the journey that operational policing have been on and the powerful difference these programmes of work have made. So as you were talking, I thought we probably could set something up, Andrew, for yourself, for Nicola, for newer members, to help you to recognise this is the powerful difference. So whilst that session was important, for me, what we need to work on as a team now is in our quarterly report, bringing some of that to life for everybody. So we are working on that. We've still got quite a bit of work to do so that we can quantify this is the difference these programs and this investment is really making.
Thanks, Breda. Angela.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I know we've got another 2 papers, so I'll keep some of my questions till later. But just going back to something that DCC Smith mentioned, I think I would wholeheartedly support that flexibility that you mentioned in terms of staffing. I think the very nature of the projects and the programme and how it will change over a period of time, keeping that element of flexibility is so key, given the skill sets for each will vary. And I suppose the reprioritisation will give us a further opportunity just to think about the staffing requirements in this particular area. But I really wanted just to say thank you for the area about the change requests and the movement over a period of time. Again, not to go into that just now because there's a lot of detail in there, which I think is quite fascinating. But I did want one question in terms of how that exercise, and there's more that we can add to it, I'm sure, over the course of the coming months and years, but how is that then being taken into the transformation board, just to think about the journey of a project programme, the robustness of the full business case, and steps that the new team under Brea's direction might be able to take to avoid some of the delays that we see and the lack of benefits coming through that were originally in some of these full business cases. There's a lot in there, so I'm just asking about how it's been used.
So I'm here with Teresa Oliphant, who is head of our support team, which includes all the work that's been going on into change requests. And so it's her team that have pulled this information together. And Teresa's going to say a few words in terms of how we are ensuring that it's not only information that is talked about and scrutinised internally at Transformation Board, also how with new change requests we're going to get more robust at looking at what's the evolution for that particular project. Teresa.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of outline that we have as part of this. So first of all, the information you've got is obviously a summary of the information that we've pulled. That's the first thing. We obviously have a project management tool that we log every change request on. Part of the work that we're doing with that suppliers to make that a bit clearer. You might remember that we'd spoken about putting lessons learned on that system as well, which feeds back. Every change request should be a lesson that we're learning for other projects as well. But another thing that we've asked is that for every change request moving forward, we outline previous change requests on that change request. So there's a history of change requests on that. So even just those small changes are steps in a journey, I suppose, that we're trying to get to, where we're just a lot clearer. Everyone's got all the information they need. And for boards like Transformation Board, that's vital, obviously, for people to be able to see the full history of that particular project and those change requests in it. So hopefully that's useful.
Angela?
Yeah, it is in part. It wasn't so much the process, it was really about the learning that has come from this whole exercise, because there's a lot in there that I would immediately be asking questions about. But anyway, we can probably pick that up in later papers or later on in the month. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'm reminded of the introductory comments by Breda that, you know, there's further evolution that wants to go on in this. Just a couple of final questions from myself in this, and then we'll move on. The cashable benefits on page 23, just assurance that those are built into the budget for 26-27 and will be built into the medium-term financial plan going forward. And in a similar theme, the mental health pathway benefits reporting, I think it's really important that we quantify those benefits and build those into our planning forecasts around how we are managing our demand and resources into the future as well. So it'd be good to have a few comments on those points. ACC mayors?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I suppose from the policing for our communities perspective, a large part of that is the resource to demand calculation. So the big opportunity with the programme overall is it kind of completes that equation that at times in the past we've really struggled to do. And we're continually asked by yourselves about, which is where have these benefits gone? So at the heart of that, if you take your response function, who are kind of about 50% of local policing resource, if you think that's 11,500 officers, it's a lot of people. We're looking across all of our resource and within a division and calculating that against the resource tolerance indicator, which is driven by all of these demand points. So in simple terms, if you see a big reduction in your mental health demand, that'll drive the calculator, which allows us to then reprofile the resource. So as it stands, the RTI calculations that have been used for our first 3 divisions, they're going to be refreshed in April with a full financial year's worth of data. We know that we've seen big benefits driven through criminal justice and reduction in demand in that space. We know there have been some shifts in mental health, missing persons and other areas. So that will allow us to get a really up-to-date picture of the resource requirements across the functions within local policing. That then links into the midterm financial planning and also helps inform our strategic workforce planning. So that little bit of the puzzle, I guess, which sits in the middle of policing for our communities, really supports the ability to follow all the way through from benefits, which are, we've always talked about the arms and legs benefits, but actually the ability to then run that through the algorithm and help us understand how that impacts resourcing on the macro scale. So hopefully that helps, but we will be able to sort of increasingly show the evidence of that as we work through the programme.
Thank you. And Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to give assurance around the cashable benefits element of it. So our business partners work with the business areas every year to develop that detailed budget build, which we'll see later. So any cashable savings are built in through that process at the appropriate point.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, thank you very much for your questions and responses to those points. We'll move on to 4.2 now, benefits framework, and back to you, Breda.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll build on some of what's been said already. So over the last 6 months, again, Nicola, Andrew, hopefully this is helpful for yourself, we have been reviewing our approach to benefits. So we're on a journey. To date, we have created 7 benefits categories. I'll say a little bit more about those in a moment. They are linked directly to our vision pillars. That's really significant. We have incorporated qualitative benefits information into this quarterly report, which you've seen. And as I mentioned, Andrew, we have delivered this bespoke session a few months ago for colleagues of yourself to bring to life the difference this is making to operational policing. So we've been working in this area over the last number of months. Benefits will continue to be one of our key focus areas over the next 6 to 12 months. We really want to improve how we identify, how we manage, and how we realise benefits. So Andrew, again, going back to your point, for me, what you'll see in the pack is far more information about these are the benefits that will be driven by these particular projects and programmes. So in front of you, there is a draft benefits management framework. This is a significant evolution for us. By implementing this framework, and that's the key thing, it's about implementing it, we will strengthen our focus on value creation. We will provide greater transparency, and we will ensure that benefits realisations really does remain central to transformation, but visibly remain central, which at the moment it's not always. So the approach, the document in front of you, has built on the 2021 strategy, which was kindly shared by Scott to us, and it incorporates updated processes, stronger governance and new tools. Critically, it really does link with, as an organisation, our Vision 2030 and these 4 pillars. That is really, really important. It's also been informed by industry best practice. So that's the document that's in front of you. So you will notice that there are 7 benefits categories which we developed a few months ago. One of these is financial. So that one links to what we currently call cashable, which is in the paper that we've just been talking about. And this is where a benefit results from a direct and measurable reduction in expenditure or operating costs. So that is the cashable. That is one of these 7 measures, so just one. Another one is efficiency or increasing capacity. And we currently report in our pack on that as hours saved for either operational or for staff. So that's 2 of these 7 categories. So we have an additional 5 categories that we will be looking at identifying and measuring in these additional 5 areas. And a number of those clearly link to the pillars, the 4 pillars in our vision. So that's really important, that we're not just measuring numbers, we are really looking at what difference is this making in terms of taking us on the journey to 2030. So we're moving away from predominantly looking at the numbers, the quantitative, to looking at both the quantitative and qualitative information. As I've said, linked to the vision. For us, the focus now going forward is to incorporate this and build it into our day-to-day reality, which we have done in some areas, right? So this is about practically applying this and implementing it. My hope is that the framework in front of you gives you a good sense of, and I suppose confidence, that we have the right approach and the right direction. We also helpfully included in the papers to you, we included a lot of appendices. The appendices are draft, some of them are what we're currently using. We've incorporated them to give you a sense of some of the information that is currently there for us. I just urge you to look at those with a degree of caution because they don't match with the paper, and that's deliberate. I wanted to give you a sense of what we've currently got. The big piece of work for us going forward is to look at those documents and others to make sure they're aligned with the framework and to make sure that we are working on practically what do we need to do to bring this to life within our team. So that's the focus. So to support, my intention is to set up a dedicated team. And of course, this is subject to resource funding, as we've talked about earlier. And this dedicated team would be to develop these tools further, to engage people both within transformation and out with, to communicate and train particularly our programme and project managers in the whole journey from benefits identification, benefits mapping, benefits baselining to what do we need to do to measure these and bring them to life. So that's the journey that we're on. We honestly are quite excited about that, and there is a lot of work to do. We have a portfolio management tool which is called PPMA. It stands for Project Portfolio Management Application. It's a tool that we are using to support us, and as we move forward, we'll be making changes and incorporating our current approach into that to make it more straightforward to monitor, to measure, and to report on these benefits. So again, particularly Nicola and Andrew, for yourself, I thought it would be helpful to kind of give you a sense that once again, this is a journey. We've made, I think, good progress and we have a lot of work to do. So hopefully the framework has given you the confidence that we have the right approach. And for us now, it's about bringing that to life. So again, would value your comments and questions.
Thanks, Breda. And can I just thank you and the whole team for getting the document to us today. I know the work that's going on behind the scenes, and it's really helpful to see this draft, as you described, very much still work in progress, but really helpful now to have that kind of one single view as how we're going to approach this organisationally, and to hear about the work that you're going on to help colleagues understand the approach to benefits identification and realisation and reporting going forward. Thank you. I'll open it up now for questions. Nicola.
Thank you. Thank you, Breda, for that context. It's really helpful. I had a couple of questions. I guess when I newbie in the room, of course, again, that when I first read it, I initially wondered, is there an opportunity perhaps to simplify this? Was my initial view or question. Notwithstanding, I recognise the complexity of policing in Scotland, so I understand that. But perhaps there might be an opportunity for us to think about how we could focus and really simplify this. And if you had to reduce it so that you could start to get it moving from projects into BAU, what might that look like? So that was one question, kind of relating to the recognizing you would want the organization to move with you in realizing benefits, which I know you've talked about a team to help train, but how can we really kind of get that simplified message involved in this to help get that broad organization behind you on this change and the reality of everyday delivery, if you like. So that was one theme of my questions. And then the other theme was around what's the baseline? So you start to realize benefits, and how are we thinking about baselining? And then how does that relate to KPIs and our, the kind of key performance indicators that we talked a little yesterday in the police performance committee, and the kind of scorecard, the balanced scorecard that we're looking at as well. So two strands to my question. Hopefully that was clear, but let me know if you'd like me to unpack that any further.
Thanks, Breda.
Thanks, Nicola, so much for those questions. If I look at the second one first, in terms of a baseline to realise and to ensure really that we are delivering the benefits and KPIs, for me, I see that as a very integral part of the delivery of this whole piece. So for me, if I think about benefits frameworks, if I think about benefits realisation, it starts with identifying, it starts with working out what these baseline measures are. So it's all the upfront piece that is really important. And for me, being honest, what we need to get better at is that upfront piece, particularly about benefits mapping process. So we look at, this is what we're aiming to do as an organisation in terms of the vision. This is the particular project. These are the products or the components of that, and mapping out how does that really drive us towards the vision, both in terms of building new capabilities, in terms of the specific outputs, importantly, in terms of the benefits, and in terms of what a lead and lag benefit. So we need to map that process out. Only after we've mapped that process out can we simplify, Nicola, and say which of these benefits are measures that we can simply and realistically get baselines for that will make the biggest difference. So that's the key part, and the baselining will be a very significant part of that process. So that is part of it. The bit about the first question in terms of an opportunity to simplify. So I completely am with you, because in terms of transformational change, unless we can make things simple, both in terms of how we articulate it, and simple in terms of this is the process that we need to train people up to be able to do, it will never live and breathe. So we need to approach this benefits piece as a transformational project. And given that's our day job, I'm hoping that we embark on it in that way, and obviously as a result of that is quite successful. In the paper, Appendix A was our draft of that, Nicola. So Appendix A was a practical guide to what we need to do to ensure that this is living and breathing. So for me, I know I said at the beginning, Chair, that the framework is a draft. I'm kind of hoping the framework is a document that we can support to move forward, because for me, Nicola, the key is Appendix A. The key for us, me and the team and I, is to look at Appendix A, to build that in a bit more detail, and to use that as a framing to ensure that we start moving this forward and start implementing this in order to be able to measure, report, and realise.
Nicola, does that address your points?
I think what I'm hearing is that you're at the start of a journey on this, and I recognise that that's the introductory remarks and some of the comments earlier from older members of the committee. And so as a new person just coming in and having that opportunity to start to build my learning and understanding of what's going on, I would encourage us to be thinking about opportunities to kind of focus and simplify the approach here. And I recognise through many transformation programs, the kind of input-output exercise is always difficult. But the more straightforward and the opportunity to really get to the priority opportunities for benefit realisation, I think will be really critical, and really critical to come back to Andrew's point earlier of really helping to vocalise and visualise for the public and for our colleagues what really what's the opportunity that we're unearthing through the transformation programme. And I worry about a complex procedure that will again take us down a road of complexity. And so I'm really offering that hopeful mirror to say I found it complex. I hope that there's an opportunity through the practice that we can think about simplifying it.
Breda?
And Nicola, again, I'm really encouraged and completely agree with all of your comments. So genuinely, thank you. If I think about benefits, the only part that I think is complicated and difficult is for people to map out what are the benefits that we're going to get from doing A and how do they drive to the result. That's the only complex part. And for me, in the past, I've always done, I keep doing this because I always map it out on a big chart with the right people in the room where you've got, this is the vision or the organisational objectives, these are the products or the components, and you map out how one drives the others. As long as you've got the right people in the room, that's not a very complicated process to facilitate, but it requires people to be able to think deeply about those interrelated components. The key thing that you've mentioned that I'm really liking and really encouraged by is the simplicity of it. So after we've done that, what we need to do, and this is the key part, is to say which of those benefits are the key ones, and those are the ones that we start reporting on. And if I look back at a piece of work that was done on criminal justice, where we did do a big benefits mapping process, the resulting document was so comprehensive, it would have made it very, very difficult, Nicola, to report on because there were too many benefits that had been identified. So for me, the bit is we need to do that upfront bit robustly, and then we need to use our discernment to say which are the few that are critical to drive Vision 2030, and also with a lens of which ones can we actually measure robustly and take the baseline measures from. So I don't think it's that, I never think benefits mapping and it is that complicated. You just need an attention to detail, which is a bit different. And I'm excited because it's a part that for me is so important to get right, because without it, Andrew, your comments earlier, we cannot justify to the people of Scotland, to the government, to each other, that we are getting value for money from the investment. So it is a critical part. So thank you so much, Nicola.
ACC Mayors, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, it's just, I think it's just to come in and support that. And I think there's a couple of bits. It is, I think, both and rather than either or. They're, like Breda says, it's not complicated, but it is really complex. So we need that level of detail, but we do need to be able to tell our story as well. And again, as I look at policing for our communities, the sheer amount of work and effort, and actually that is one of the big resource pressures for us around business analysts, around mining the data behind the model to understand, are we having the impact that we want to have? And across our proof of concept division and our further two divisions, how do we refine the model to maximize the impact? That's a significant pressure, but actually telling the story should be really simple and should be really accessible, because we should be delivering a better service to the public. And a case study in that this morning, I shared with colleagues a podcast that Central FM are starting with Forth Valley, which was the pilot division, and it's their local area commander, their chief inspector, taking questions from the public about local issues. And in half an hour, you get a real sense of that understanding of that investment in preventative policing and that clarity around what our role and responsibility is and impact on the public, but also the confidence to open himself up to accountability. That's, to me, a qualitative benefit of the work that was been doing. And if you listen to that for half an hour, you get a real sense that we've shifted the dial culturally around what's going on. So the simple question to me at the heart of all this as a police officer is what we're doing going to make a difference in our communities? Are people going to be safer as a result of what's happening? And when you look through those metrics, those additional metrics that Breda has pointed to, that really presents a really exciting opportunity. And the last point around KPIs, because we're essentially delivering a whole new model for local policing, one of the key products that was in the business case is a revised performance management framework. So what are currently classed as benefits will ultimately become our performance management framework at the end. So as we deliver that, and you can see that the depth of detail and data that we are churning out really around every area, as Breda says, we're looking at all of those, and over time we're going, right, these ones don't really matter. They're not really having an impact, so we'll stop reporting on those. These ones are really, really important. So as we move out of a division, we're handing that over to them and saying, this is what you need to be monitoring. It's actually also what you're going to be held to account for. So as opposed to just looking at detection rates of crime, we're right in behind that around timeliness of response to calls, around understanding the confidence levels, but being able to map them to specific aspects of the work. So that hopefully gives you that sense of, on that element, we really are trying to line up benefits which then become KPIs when we get to the end of it.
Just one
Nicola?
final comment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pauline. Just one final reflection, and I totally appreciate the complexity of policing, absolutely. Also, though, connecting this to some of the points in the earlier discussion about the ambition to build in a bit of agility and a bit of flexibility in the delivery of the transformation programme, and how this connects to that kind of agile methodology, our opportunity to think about benefits realisation in that way. Lovely to hear what we would stop through recognising that process and that ability to use this also to help prioritise. So those are some of the attributes, if you like, that's driving my question around simplicity, is that kind of new way of working, and perhaps it offers an opportunity to reflect and think about that on a go-forward basis.
Thanks, Nicola. Andrew?
Thank you. Part of what I want to say, stroke ask, has already been talked about, but just to keep going a little bit. Figure 1 with the 7 benefits in descending order in the document in 4.2, really, really interesting. You've got the classic problem, though, in transformation, is that inevitably there's a confirmation bias to do projects which are easier to measure. And of course, things which are easier to measure normally relate to things such as money and hours worked, for example. But if you read down that list of 7 things, the ones which I think the public would most appreciate an improvement in performance on are the things that, as you go further and further down the list. So it's what we can do as an organisation to improve our performance against things which are harder to measure. And all we can do is say that these things are improving the narrative, improving our performance against something which is non-financial, but is hugely important to the people of Scotland. So it's more to give you the support in how you try and deliver that, and how you convince Police Scotland and the SPA that these things are very important. But I just wouldn't mind a bit of feedback as to how you're going to manage that narrative in that presentation.
So I think Andrew, as I'm thinking about just checking out your question, as you look at the 7 categories, your comment is that as we go down, they get progressively a little bit more complicated to measure. And as we go further, they're also the ones that are more important to people within Scotland. And I'd agree with you completely on both of those points. And in terms of what we're doing, we need to work on that. So at the moment, CI Booker is part of a team, Andrew, that we call Op Evolve, which is a few officers that are supporting us in transformation. And he has, with the team, he's been looking at exactly that. How can we quantify and qualify those latter measurements. And Andrew, that's part of the journey. We need to upfront, building on Nicola's point, we need to be better at the beginning at saying which are those measures and how are we going to baseline and how are we going to properly report on it. So I don't have a definitive answer because that's the next iteration and the journey that we're on. Your point in terms of they're more important to the people of Scotland, I completely agree, which is why for us the numerical measures now were the first two, and we have 5 other categories that are really important that we need to get better and better at over time.
Thank you for that. I think there's also a message for us that we need to show that we're sympathetic to your ability to deliver those non-financial metrics and subsequently KPIs, because they're very important things. And we just need to have a structure which doesn't push us too much towards financial performance in terms of the benefits of transformation. So as far as I'm concerned, it's an open door to those projects which benefit the things further down the list. So looking forward to what we see over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Andrew.
ACC mayors and then Sarah.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I think again for policing for communities, particularly enhancing community policing, that has precisely been the challenge. We do, like any organisation, we tend to ascribe meaning to things that we can measure rather than ask the question, what is it we need to understand? So the data development agenda for policing for communities for ECP has been really important. It comes with some consequences. So I think sometimes it means, and we have had that conversation with this programme, actually at the outset, we're not 100% sure what all the benefit measurements are because we actually need to get out there and start to test them. So sometimes it means we're coming forward at an early stage and going, we know what the high level benefits we want to achieve are, but we need to go out and do proof of concept. We need to probably fail a few times before we can actually start to explain what that looks like. So grateful for support around that at times, because that data development agenda bit is difficult, it's challenging, and I think perhaps at times we default to things we definitely know we can measure because we know we can tell you about that quickly. That's not always the right answer. So we've definitely pulled a lot more data points from across the organisation that are focused on the 4 pillars of the vision, which is what we're built around. We are employing kind of new systems which help us measure that, but we have to be careful about that because we don't want to create a bureaucracy about simple things. But for example, you know, how we communicate with the public is done through a dedicated platform. How we map our engagements with the public, we're now utilising a system for that. So there's a lot of quantitative measurements that are there, but we've also relied very heavily in our evaluation on additional survey questions for the public, which allow us to start to get into confidence, user satisfaction. And really critically, when we did our initial internal evaluation of Forth Valley, really relying on the service design team in transformation who went back and did a lot of dedicated workshops and were able to spend time with the users within the system, capture a lot of information, and that provided an awful lot of really strong qualitative data, which we were able to align with the quantitative that allows us to get a sense of what's working really well, where are the struggles, and how do we start to design that out. So I think there's a lot of good learning in the work that we're doing there that supports this, and hopefully we're trying to get a slot at Board Development Day coming up where we can start to get into some of that and unpick it. So
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. It was just my reflection on the benefit categories, and I completely understand the point about the quantitative versus the qualitative. My reflection is that they are not mutually exclusive, which is really important, and that not only do we need to, I think it's to Nicola's point and Tim's point about the it's if we are creating the quantitative, but it's not directly linked to the qualitative, we need to then map out well and articulate that story of the quantitative measures have allowed us to do this in unconnected areas of the business because of the capacity building or the capability building. So I think it's that additional step we also probably need to think about. But my reflection was they're not mutually exclusive.
Thanks very much. So Bridget, many thanks for getting the document suite to this stage. As you said, it's you're going to refine it over the coming months, particularly as you apply it in practice and see how it needs to be adapted to fit the organisation as it moves on its transformation journey. And also, as we spoke about, just refining those measures around benefits so that we can have a clearer line of sight between the reported benefits and how they're actually resulting in improvements, very much in line with the report on best value that we received recently around how our work translates into performance gain. Thanks very much. Let's move on to 4.3 then, the prioritisation framework. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. So again, as I was thinking about this session, did realise there would be some new members, so I thought it would be again helpful to share that we have been making substantial progress over the last year to transform our approach to how we prioritise what we've already talked about is a pretty ambitious portfolio of activity. So I have been particularly reflecting on it this week. As I said, it's my sort of year anniversary, so it seemed a good point to reflect on progress. And we've already mentioned that we had a review of change. This was before I joined. This was back in October 2024. And part of that review was around we need to do things differently, hence my appointment, hence DCC Smith being the DCC for transformation. So that was the start point. And critically, that's the key thing. It was the start point. So over the past year, we have been really driving this forward, and portfolios have been realigned. We've got this unified transformation function that's been created, and we've got an integrated structure within transformation that really does bring together all of the different elements from portfolio delivery. Tim's just mentioned service design, which is a really critical part of our offering. We've got change management that I've mentioned needs to be developed, and we need to increase the sort of capacity and capability there. We've also got resource planning in this new role that I've mentioned, and we've got business analysis. So it's pretty comprehensive in terms of what we cover. So we've got this integrated structure now. So we've talked already earlier about the structural changes. We've also talked about the benefits. In this paper, some of those elements are mentioned because it's important in terms of transformation and in terms of prioritisation. The other elements that are in this paper that are really significant to us is around work that's been done on the front door process, which Teresa developed and has brought to life with members of her team. And the front door process, as I look on this call, Andrew's on it, DCC Smith, Scott Ross is on it as your representative. So this front door process brings together representatives from all of the different functions that would have a part to play in thinking about and making sense of whether or not something should be a priority for us. So we've got operations represented, digital finance, HR, procurement, etc. So we're all there in the room, including Scott as the SPA representative. At this front door, Nicola, Andrew, for yourselves, the others have sort of heard it before. At this front door process, the key is that all potential new initiatives or change projects are shared and discussed. And they're assessed using a prioritisation matrix. And this matrix looks at what's the effort it will take us to do it, and importantly, what is the impact if we do make this change. And the impact categories there, we've simplified it to 4, but they really do link with the 7 categories of benefits that we talked about earlier. And what we're able to do through that prioritisation activity, with all of the people in the room having a voice in that, is we're able to get a clear view of which projects, which initiatives really have got quite a high impact, often for relatively low effort, and potentially could progress. I use potentially because it all depends on what's the rest of the portfolio and other work that's ongoing. So all of these different projects and initiatives that come to the front door, we put them on this prioritisation matrix so we can see how they relate to other in-flight projects. And it enables us to make comparisons, and it enables us to say, is something more important in terms of the benefits it will drive, the efficiency, strengthen the front line? Is that more significant than perhaps something that's an in-flight project at the moment? So we can make real decisions based on that information. So that is a really significant part of our prioritisation. At the front door, we also, Nicola, Andrew, we also align what we call a tiering to each project. There's 3 tiers. The first one would be that this is a really significant project and it needs full wraparound support from transformation. A tier 2 would be that it needs some support and some resources, potentially from service design, which does tend to be an area that tier 2 projects could value some support from. And tier 3 will be more of a sort of self-service model where we will have governance tool and processes that could support people in order to move forward on an initiative themselves. The important thing for us to know about all these initiatives and projects is when I joined, we did not have this full picture of all of these projects. And for me, the concern on that is that if there are lots of projects, initiatives that are happening that impact people, and we're doing other projects that impact the same people, something will fall down. So it's not about controlling, it's about overseeing so that we can think about from a people impact perspective, what can the organisation cope with? So that's one of the really significant key drivers for us. So this prioritisation approach is living and breathing. We've been running through these front door process. I don't know if Scott wants to come in at his to share his perspective on that because he's an integral part of it with us. And what that means is we have potential initiatives and projects that if we've got available funding, resource, we can potentially move some of those forward. So it's helping us to robustly have an oversight and a view of and an ability to prioritise. And CDIO Henry, Andrew and I have been using this to prioritise the projects for next year. We've talked quite a number of times about the fact that we have these 30, 38, 39 projects that are all really significant in terms of what they're going to deliver and how they're going to move us forward with Vision 2030. So we've been looking at that. We've been looking at these initiatives that have come through the front door to make sense of for next year. What's our priority? And are there things that potentially we should be thinking about pausing? We could potentially be thinking about moving back a little bit in order to ensure that we can deliver what's important. So that's the activity that's been going on. DCC Smith mentioned earlier that this activity is ongoing for next year. We've made huge progress. Again, later we'll talk about this in relation to the reform budget. We're in a far stronger position in terms of our prioritisation for next year. And this isn't a one-off activity. We are continuing to work on it. And the really important thing to say, again, building on DCC Smith mentioned these challenge sessions, one of which did go on till 9 o'clock at night. And we, Andrew and I, are working with the rest of the exec on this because it is, you know, from a transformation perspective, my role, the team's role, we are here to deliver whichever projects and initiatives are deemed to be the most significant for this organisation. It's not our choice. So the important thing is that all of the exec member stakeholders and the SROs that are involved in these projects, they have a part to play in this prioritisation. So that's the activity that we are working on at the moment. Again, really hope Nicola, Andrew, particularly yourselves, I hope that's helpful to give you a sense of the journey. And once again, really happy for questions and comments. And Scott, if you would like to add to the front door process, thank you.
Scott, anything you want to add?
No, thanks, Breda, and thanks, Pauline. I guess for me, the front door process is an effective triage system for all those kind of ideas that have been generated within the organisation, in order to then look at and map it against impact and effort. It replaces an older process called a PPA, which was a kind of paper-based process to assess the kind of scale and size of a project internally within Police Scotland, I guess. And as DCC Smith kind of highlighted earlier, the next stage of that front door process is then to look at all those projects and actually then have a big list, you know, of whatever 40 projects that you have with a line somewhere down that list that then tells us what the priorities are. So yeah, an effective initial triage process of impact and effort. I guess that next step is about actually where do you draw that line, how many of them proceed, and what are the priorities that exist within it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, both. Again, really helpful to see this document and to see the criteria around how programmes and projects are being assessed and prioritised. Really keen to understand how you understand the kind of interdependencies amongst these projects as well. So what has to happen first, and what order, for other things to happen, and how you also assess those risks. I think you described them in the benefits paper, that those things that just have to happen because a system is no longer supported or legislation is changing. How do they fit within this matrix as well?
So I'll say a couple of words, and I'll bring in Andrew Hendry, because he's been supporting. We've been working together quite a bit on this. So in terms of the interdependency and the risk, this is all a critical part of our thinking. This is why this is complex. So when I first joined, and I looked at again this sort of the over allocation, and looked at the project, I did quite a few activities, getting my sort of team in a room to look at with Andrew's team to look at what are the priorities, and you suddenly realise this is really quite complex, because you're quite right, Chair, there are a lot of interdependencies, particularly if I look at Andrew Hendry in terms of the digital projects, in terms of which one has to happen in order to be a precursor to something else. So that is, just to give you assurance, that is part of our thinking. It's always part of the discussion. The bit in terms of sort of assessing risks, and particularly if I think about the projects that are in the other category around sort of legislation and a lot of the ones in the digital area, in terms of we have systems that are near to the end of life in terms of support, and we need to quickly look at what we can do in order to move those forward. Again, that's part of, I think, it's what makes it quite complex, because it would be quite straightforward if we could look at this with certain criteria and say, well, therefore this is, if I think about some legislation pieces or some software pieces, the reality is, in terms of benefits, it won't drive the same savings, but there is real risk associated if we don't do that. So it's complex, it's part of the mix. Andrew Hendry, I keep saying surnames now, Andrew Hendry has been we've been working really closely on a more detailed process that looks at what is the threat, risk and harm for the different pieces of work, as well as the other categories in terms of benefits and efficiency and so forth, in order to, and we're looking at this with the exec, in order to say, so how does this all marry together in order to enable us, as DCC Smith said earlier, to get to a point where all of the different in-flight projects are prioritised, so that we can say, well, look, this is our budget, these are the ones that really are falling below the line and we need to reconsider. So that activity is ongoing. My focus, Andrew's focus, the team's focus on the next few weeks is to move that forward, and we will share with you the result of that in terms of if there's impact with in-flight projects. I'll pass over to Andrew to say a few more words on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I mean, I think at its simplest form, the portfolio's got things that we have to do and the things we want to do. And I think the have to do's, are either born from legislation or from, external drivers, or equally from what our class is kind of burning platform protection from critical failure. So that applies to technology, data, as much as it does to other things. And I think, it's kind of common sense to prioritise on that basis. Thereafter, it's about, the kind of broader benefits piece. And certainly between design work from service design and also from some of our more process type, continuous improvement type spaces, we're able to, to find synergies and really evaluate where we're going to get biggest bang for buck. I think also as well, we are working multi-year programs now. So, I mean, certainly from back in the past, I would say that probably only 10, 15, 20% every year of budget was available for anything new, because with multi-year programs that we're still delivering, and as they fall off, new things come on. So it's not to say it's not important, because it is, and we do look across the piece in regards to dependency and make sure that we're finding the best jigsaw pieces at that time. But I think overall, the portfolio year to year is about continuing to deliver the things we've prioritised and then bringing on the next thing off the list. And dependency really is picked up through design, be that technical design or be that service design. Thank you.
Thanks very much, both of you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. So I think what I'm hearing then in terms of, sorry, Angela, I'll bring you in for a summarise.
Sorry, Pauline. I was just waiting to see if anybody else wanted to come in. Just two questions, brief questions on the risks. You mention in the paper that there's a risk with those and a high number of officers on modified duties. I just wondered if you could say a wee bit more about how that impacts on the programme, what your experience has been so far, and if there's any particular areas. And the governance question as well, what the risk is in around that, because I know that we're coming on to talk about the committee effectiveness, and I wondered whether or not that would be something that we can take into that item as well. Thank you.
I'll say a few words, maybe leave some of the operational colleagues to talk more about the operational delivery elements in terms of, as you've said, about sort of modified, etc. So that there are a number of risks. We thought that would be helpful to put in the paper as a sort of a flavour of some of the things that we are juggling, and that's the kind of thing. It's like we have to be constantly aware, and if you like, surveying the landscape with all of this. You know, if I think about myself, partly what we have been doing within transformation with our structure is thinking about how can we set ourselves up for success to deal with some of these potential risks. You know, the first one there, as I look at it, is around financial constraints. That's really close to our hearts. We and you know, personally, I'm sort of juggling each week in terms of how can we deliver within the window that we've got. So it is, you know, Angela, it's we're aware of them, we are working to them, and we're just kind of trying to keep abreast of them so that we can ensure that they don't manifest as issues rather than risks. And I'll let Tim answer the operational aspect.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think there's probably, we could talk about it for hours, but I think there's probably three big bits. The first bit around the risks that and it is about workforce capacity at the highest level, is firstly the data element. So you look at a high level at our FTE numbers, that is not an accurate portrayal of our capacity, if you will, as an organisation. So as we work through, particularly division by division, it's clear that we have an awful lot of individuals who have a range of health and wellbeing needs, which prioritise what they can and can't do, and that adds a layer of complexity to us as to how we deploy those capabilities, but also respect those restrictions. So really getting beneath the data is critical. I can look at a page and say, well, if 30 police officers there, we should be able to meet this. But when you discover that 6 of them can't do night shifts, 8 of them can't do control and restraint, so on and so forth, that starts to massively shift your ability to deploy that resource. So it adds a layer of complexity to the process that makes it really challenging. The second bit is culture. So we clearly, psychological absence is a significant impact for us. The external drivers for that are clear. If you're a police officer, you're an emergency services worker, you're exposed to trauma, but the internal drivers are also really critical for us to recall. So constantly trying to balance this need for us to reform and transform at pace with the need for us to provide psychological safety and security for our officers and staff. And that's a real challenge, as you'll know. Transformation isn't just about processes and systems, it's about culture and it's about people. So actually getting that balance right is massively, massively challenging. And again, within enhancing community policing, we've really seen and we really benefit from the business implementation folks in transformation who are excellent at this. And it kind of goes back to the benefits point. This is not about introducing new processes. This is about leading to cultural change that transforms a frontline. So trying to get that balance right about how we implement change, take people out of their comfort zone, but also support them and make them feel more valued, and particularly the thriving workforce element of that. And the last bit I would say is the impact on design. Is getting this balance right between making sure that we don't create a culture where people feel entitled to have restrictions that they maybe don't require, because we are a 24/7, 365 service. We expect our officers and many of our staff to work antisocial hours, to work at times when others have off, and we have to maintain that. But equally, acknowledge the fact that where we can maximise the benefit of an individual, regardless of their health and well-being, then that's a massive opportunity. So an example of that, designing into the new local policing model rules within the Community Investigation Hub, which can maximise the ability and experience and knowledge of police officers regardless of their health status. And hearing quite powerful stories from folks who've moved into that, some saying, you know, I used to look at my uniform in the locker and think I'd never wear that again. And now I'm speaking to victims every day and I'm having a really positive impact on their life. So that thinking through the design element to maximise the capacity of the people we have, regardless of their health restrictions, is also a big challenge. So I don't know if that helps, Andrew. That's kind of 3 quick points as to why it presents a risk, but if we get it right, why it also presents massive opportunities.
Angela?
I do understand the importance of it, Tim, and it's absolutely critical. We've debated it long and hard at the people committees, Tom will know, but it was just why it was so prominent here. I mean, it's absolutely right that we do all that we can, but maybe we can come back to that. But on the governance side,
DCC Smith?
Angela, did you mean governance in terms of workforce around restrictions, or?
You're on mute, Angela.
sorry, there's a particular reference on page 4 of the report that flags, so that's where workforce capacity comes in, and governance and scrutiny is also mentioned there as an amber risk. And as I said, I just wondered whether or not it's something that we should take into the item on committee effectiveness.
Yeah, I mean, happy to do that. I think I still think we haven't got governance quite right. We know how important it is, absolutely, but I still think we are quite heavy in terms of governance, is my sense. I would like us to be a bit more agile and flexible in terms of what we do. I think when I reflect, I look at sort of Andrew's world in terms of the speed at which the data science team, for example, come up with a solution for something. And then it's about how do we best use our governance processes to not slow that down in terms of being able to be more effective at rolling out projects, programs, work, and almost that fail fast mentality. I think culturally, and this is something that we're really working on around our risk appetite. I think we like to mitigate everything, and I think we like to be, as perfect as we can be. And sometimes in policing that's essential. But I think sometimes in the innovation and transformation space, we perhaps need to accept that we won't get it right all the time, and we'll try something and we'll fail, and that's okay. And we'll review, we'll learn, we'll move on. So I think that point in here around governance and scrutiny is perhaps, I do see a fair bit of duplication, and I think we need to get better at that, both internally and in a scrutiny sense as well. So I know we're working on that kind of in terms of conversations with officials, etc. And we've definitely improved. We've come a long way, but I think there's probably more we can do. And I reflect on, especially in the kind of innovation space, I want us to be able to do things quickly, more agile, learn and and move on and review and everything else. And I think some of our processes don't sort of lend themselves to that, I guess. So that's probably why it would appear there. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah,
Angela?
thank you. Again,
Yeah,
Pauline,
okay.
maybe we can
we'll come on to that part
off.
of committee effectiveness. Nicola?
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Oh, I don't know if I froze. Oh no, I haven't. I'm back. Thank you very much. And actually, encouraging to hear the thought about test, fail, proof of concepts, all of that type of stuff, and not easy to implement that in a public sector, highly scrutinised organisation. So totally understand the balance that's required there, and perhaps in a different setting, we can think through a range of options that might have been working in other similar organisations. The Financial Conduct Authority perhaps is a useful comparator. But the reason I raised my hand, Pauline, I had two questions, please. Because often in the context of a prioritisation discussion, what we don't see at this kind of perhaps board level is actually what are you deprioritising, so we can kind of get a sense of what's not hitting the kind of information that we see, so it might be helpful just to unearth that so we can understand the approach to prioritisation, because I think the paper sets out a really clear view on the front door triage piece, but I'm left still asking how does prioritisation really work? And perhaps the question I should be asking is what have you deprioritised to help with that? So that's one thing, not perhaps for detailed answer now, but perhaps we could take that away and have a think about that. And then my second question was noting that there's quite a sizable team being proposed in this paper, that the view on cost and affordability, and perhaps we can pick that up in the budget discussion.
Thanks, Nicola. DCC Smith?
You're right in terms of your first point. We're not great at talking about what we've deprioritised. We can build that in. That's no problem. We have done quite a lot of work around that. Hence my comment earlier about the sort of challenge panels and what have you. We can absolutely show that. The second point, probably takes me back to my original thought around the temporary versus permanent nature of the team. So this was written at a time when we were in a slightly different position around resourcing, and we're working through at the moment the gaps we fill and the vacancies we leave. So we will come back to you on that, but that's not, I guess it's not finished yet. Work in progress just in terms of vacancy factor across the organisation, vacancies within each area, etc. But we're alive to the fact that the delivery of the speed, perhaps, at certain things we can do will be impacted in terms of the balance of resourcing that I mentioned earlier around permanence versus fixed term contracts, day rates, skills and capabilities, etc. So probably not a fixed position, Nicola, one that's constantly under review, and yeah, we are where we are, but we can keep you posted on that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So colleagues, many thanks for sharing this with us. Really helpful to see the prioritisation arrangements. We absolutely endorse the next steps that are set out on page 29. And we'll come back, as you described, Breda, to understand the detail of what's in the programme for 26-27, and indeed as part of the development of the medium-term financial plan. I'm sure we'll get more detail over the medium to longer term as well. So thank you very much. That takes us on to committee effectiveness, and I think Karen is going to be joining us if she hasn't already.
Hi, good morning, Chair.
There you are. Hi, Karen.
Hi. Thank you. So the committee effectiveness process is an important part of our commitment to strengthen and improve our governance. So the annual self-assessment process allows us to consider how the committee is performing against its terms of reference. This informs committee development and work plans, as well as member development. It also informs the overall certificate of assurance process, which is required to be submitted to the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee in May as part of the annual audit and reporting process. So this year we asked stakeholders again for their views, and the number of overall responses to the survey have doubled compared to last year. Of the responses received, one was specific to the Resources Committee. Overall, the results from the members' survey are positive, with results either being improved from last year or remaining the same, and the stakeholder result received was positive. So just before I finish, I wanted to thank SPA colleagues for their contribution in collating and presenting the analysis in the report. And the ask of the committee today is to discuss the results and confirm whether you're satisfied that the committee has discharged its terms of reference for the 25-26 period to date. and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Karen, thanks very much, and thanks to all members and stakeholders that provided their feedback, always really helpful. And as a committee, we're always keen to continue to improve. And as we spoke about already in the agenda today, it's really helpful to see the continued evolution of the reporting to committee. It helps us in terms of effectively fulfilling our duties around scrutiny, oversight and assurance on major financial matters. So thank you very much for that. Any particular comments from members on the feedback? I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have a development session late spring, and we will be able to consider the feedback in more detail and develop our priorities for the coming couple of years thereafter as well. And of course, colleagues from Police Scotland will be very welcome for your input too. Angela.
Well, I think that would be great, Pauline. All I was going to say was if there is an observation that there perhaps is a bit of duplication, then I think as board members, then we really should consider that and what we might do to give ourselves the assurance, but also make sure that there's no burden of governance on officers. So thank you.
Absolutely, and again, it'd be really grateful for any specific examples that people have of that duplication, because we obviously want to absolutely reduce that. And again, it was a point that was earthed in the best value report. John.
Thank you. It's just on that duplication point, we accept the recommendation in the best value report, and we're taking forward a piece of work with BDOs, our internal auditors, to do a board evaluation, including looking at the committees where there might be duplication and also some gaps. So we'd really welcome any feedback from Angela or other members into that work.
Thanks, John. That would be really helpful. Okay, so are colleagues content? Alistair, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Pauline, for being slightly slow and raising my hand there. I know you were just about to ask our colleagues content to note that we've discharged our responsibilities, and I would agree that we have. I think that looking at committee effectiveness and having listened to the questioning, the discussions that we've had already this morning, what strikes me is the real progress that Police Scotland are actually making in terms of best use of the resources, working towards best value, that introduction to Bida and her team. These are all, having been on resources for 5 years, these are all significant developments, and credit for that has to lie with, the executive and the teams within Police Scotland. But I do also think it speaks, to the questioning, from the oversight that's provided by Resources Committee, and just touching on the point about we've now got some really good, strong foundations. Nobody's complacent. There's a lot of work to go. And I just feel that a lot of the questions that have been asked this morning point to that future. So, I think all that ties in and can be discussed further at the development day. But I personally am really encouraged, by this committee's effectiveness, but the effectiveness of Police Scotland and how they are improving at pace.
Thanks very much, Alistair. So you anticipated what I was going to ask. Are just for the record then, are members content that if the Resources Committee can report that it has effectively discharged its duties? Yes, okay, thank you very much. Item 6 is the committee work plan. I see there's a lot coming in June based on what we've got so far. Deborah, anything else you wanted to mention around the work plan?
Nothing to add, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. This ends the public session of our Resources Committee, but just before we move into private session, I want to acknowledge the tremendous contribution from Tom Halpin. This is Tom's last meeting of the Resources Committee. His appointment as a member of the authority comes to an end at the end of this month. So I want to thank you, Tom, for your huge contribution based on many years and experience of policing, of the criminal justice service and sector, and indeed your senior leadership across many areas. Your experience has certainly helped us in delivering our objectives of scrutiny, assurance and oversight and all the significant financial and budgetary matters facing the authority. I know you've been in Resources Committee a lot longer than I've had the pleasure of being on it, but you will certainly be a huge miss to us, and we wish you all the very best, whatever the future holds for you. Thanks very much.